Ah, good day, chaps? Wrong. The Great Wars happened. Yeah. Yeah, them Germans invaded our best buds, the French. Yeah. Like, what did those chaps do? And also Belgium. Didn't we tell them Belgium wanted none of their nonsense? Bro, shut up. Nobody cares. They even got a friendly chap, the Austro-Hungarians. Right now, they are getting bullied by the Serbians.
Ah! Eat this, you Austro-Hungarians!
Anyways, let's check out how the Belgium chaps are doing. Oh, hello, Germans. How was your day? Oh, what are those for? Oh, do we want to help them? Like, really, they don't look like they're doing so hot, you know? Wait, what is happening? War something something. Oh, yeah, World War I explained by an idiot. Alright, now to explain what is happening, as I know most of you guys don't know what that guy is saying. Oh wait, chap! I was already explaining this! Well, I do it better, so go cry over there. Okay, let's begin. Okay, the first war was, of course, the war between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. And if you're wondering how this war even happened, you should probably watch part 1. Anyways, you'd think that the Serbians would get crushed, but do not underestimate the Serbs.
Yeah. That one looked like it hurt.
Yeah, it did not go so well. But while the Austro-Hungarians were figuring out how to hold a gun properly, the Germans were planning out their war. Their plan was the Schlieffen Plan, which was to quickly take out Belgium and Netherlands, then take Paris and go attack the Russians afterwards. Then the war would be over in 6 weeks, right?
Yes, this is going to work.
This has to work.
Yeah, anyways, they decided to not attack the Netherlands as they thought it would be good for trade. But before the war even happened, the British sent a letter to both Germany and France telling them to respect Belgium neutrality. France said that they would, but Germany just didn't reply. But not long after the letters, Germany would declare war and the Western Front would begin. Very quickly, Germany would absolutely destroy the forces in Belgium. But it wasn't going as well on the French front. 260,000 Germans tried to defeat the French in this one battle, as the Germans are already at the gates of Paris just by going through Belgium. But the Germans gave their commanders a lot of freedom during the war, which led to some mistakes. Oh, we are here. Yeah. We've in, I guess. Oh, I'm getting orders to go. Bye. So, this guy named Von Kluck decided to disobey orders and make a gap between the two divisions encircling Paris. So, the British and French used this to try to kick the Germans out in the Battle of Marne. But while all of this was happening, the Russians got just enough time to prepare for war, and they marched into East Prussia, but they did get their butts kicked in the Battle of Tannenberg. So far, the war has not gone as planned for both sides, but what happens next? Now, while the war in Europe was happening, there were still theaters in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, so let's take a quick look into that. Now, in Africa, we see the German protectorates of Togoland and Cameroon get attacked by the French. And German forces in Southwest Africa tried to attack South Africa several times during the entire war, but never really resulted in anything. While in East Africa, German forces were playing guerrilla warfare with the Allies. Now, while that was happening in Africa, in the Pacific, New Zealand landed in German Samoa, and Australia took German New Guinea. And in the upper Pacific, Japan just didn't like what Germany was doing in their oceans, so they just declared war. Japanese helped with a few naval battles, and in a few months, all German Pacific holdings were in the hands of the Allies. But Germany was also doing some stuff in Asia, as they were trying to get India to revolt against the British. But surprisingly, this actually made nationalist activity go down, as the Indians thought that if they helped the British, they would give them more freedom. In fact, the Germans tried to get Afghanistan on their side, but The Afghans didn't really care about any war. But in the end, the Germans didn't really do anything, as India would become a very useful source of manpower. Alright, now that we got all of these other theaters out of the way, let's go back to the two main ones. Now at this point, both sides have agreed that getting a line of men and just watch them shoot each other to death is a bad war plan. So with new tech like HMGs, tanks, barbed wire, and gas warfare, eventually they made a new form of warfare where you just throw men at the other side until you make a breakthrough. Anyways, after the Battle of Marne, both Allies and Central Powers played a fun game of who can outflank each other. But by the end of 1914, they eventually made a stable front line going from the English Channel all the way to the Swiss border. But let's take a little pause and go back to the Eastern Front. The Russians weren't doing so good as they didn't have much heavy equipment or support functions. This would cost them to lose the Battle of Tannenberg and the Battle of the Masarinian Lake. And by spring 1915, they had to leave Galicia. But after these battles, the front would stabilize, and trench warfare would go into full swing on the Eastern Front. After both fronts stabilized, you'll start to realize that the Central Powers mainly stuck to defense, and the Allies kept trying offense, but it never really worked out. But after the major battles, both fronts would be stagnant, with very little gains for either side. But in February 1916, the Germans would launch an attack on Verdun, lasting all the way until December of the same year. And while the Battle of Verdun was happening, one of the most gruesome battles in history was also happening, the Battle of Somme. In this one battle alone, 420,000 British, 200,000 French, and 500,000 Germans died in this battle. And a lot of them weren't even from enemy fire, a lot were from disease and mustard gas. But after a lot of fighting, the Allies won both the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of Somme. But there is still other front I have yet to talk about. After a long time of neutrality, the Ottomans decided to threaten the Russians from the south and take the Suez Canal. The Allies just decided to not care, but eventually the Ottomans would declare war. Almost immediately, the French tried to do a naval invasion, but that didn't really go well. The Allies tried again, though, in the Mesopotamian campaigns, which would win as well as you would think. But after some trial and error, they eventually got to Baghdad. But there's still a few fronts we still have yet to talk about that were happening around the same time. One of the fronts I've kind of forgotten so far is the naval front, but the British just kind of destroyed everything in their way. But they did do a naval blockade on the Germans, stopping them from getting supplies and food. But the few German ships that were still alive just kind of sinked everything they saw, which included sinking US merchant ships. But let's go back to the land and see what's happening over there. In the Balkans, Austria-Hungary was facing Russia, so it could only use 1/3 of their army to attack Serbia. They did briefly occupy Belgrade, but they were soon kicked out. And on the other side of Austria-Hungary, Italy decided to join the war, who until then was just watching it all happen. The Allies offered them all the land they could ever want from Austria-Hungary if they just joined the war. Besides the Italians pushing a little bit into the mountains, it was all a stalemate. But in the Balkans, the Central Powers got Bulgaria to join their side, adding another front to Serbia. Soon after, Serbia would collapse, and their friend Montenegro. And all remaining Serbian troops fled to Greece. After seeing this, the French and the British would offer the Greeks to join the war. The Greek government was very pressured, so said yes, but the king was pro-German. This led to Greece being divided between pro-government and pro-king forces. But after a lot of talking and armed confrontation in Athens, which all led to the king being abdicated and his second son in charge. And soon after, Greece would join World War I on the side of the Allies. But unfortunately for the Allies, this just added another static front. There was also another Balkan country joining the Allies. Romania, after a bit of persuasion, decided to join the Allies, around the same time as Greece. While Greece was doing fine, nothing really happening on the front, Romania was doing a lot worse, as they held on to their country until summer 1917. They were attacked from all sides, which knocked them out of the war. Now, while all of this fighting was happening in the Balkans, let's check what was happening on the Eastern Front. Now, like all the other fronts, it was mostly static, but they would actually take Galicia back. But with low supply and other problems, they couldn't take this victory to the fullest. And even worse for all sides, the war was starting to take a toll on every single person in it. With all the great powers knowing this, they tried to make a peace deal, and well, you can guess how that went.
No,
Salve.
Germany.
Where do I get
Can we get
salve?
this is so stupid.
Everything for Russia.
But it was becoming clear we were finally going to see the conclusion of this war very soon. With the many fronts of Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire just kept getting pushed back on all sides. The naval blockade was definitely not helping Germany. And the Russians, well, they could be doing better. The Russians weren't doing the best on the battlefield, but how were they doing internally? The Tsar, Nicholas II, was on the battlefield, which left Emperor Alexandra in charge. With her incompetent rule, food shortages, and the murder of Rasputin, which led to mass protests. Also, another thing that was not helping is by 1916, 5 million Russian soldiers were dead. So, Tsar Nicholas sent his own army to kill the strikers in Petrograd. But the Russian army refused to kill their own people. Eventually, the protests became too much for the Tsar, and he had to set up the Russian provisional government. This did not really help the problem as much as the Tsar wished. And with mass confusion and the Russians just not wanting to fight anymore, the Eastern Front became all victories for the Germans. And finally, with all these problems over, Germany and Vladimir Lenin went to Russia to set up a new Bolshevik government. And the people were demanding the war be over and Bolshevik rule. Russia knew they could not continue the war for much longer, so signed an armistice and began negotiations with Germany. At first, the Bolsheviks refused all German terms. But once German tanks started rolling across Ukraine, they quickly accepted. In the peace treaty, the Russians would lose the Baltics, Ukraine, Belarus, and more. While the Russians were in pieces, in 1917 the USA has gotten tired of the Germans destroying their ships, for no apparent reason. They would then join the war, helping with naval battles and helping on the Western Front. This was even worse for the Germans, as a year earlier, Robert Nivelle replacing Pétain. As commander of French armies, he would plan a spring offensive. Once he started his spring offensive, they reached a massive breakthrough. It only costed 15,000 casualties, which compared to other battles wasn't that much. But the French had very poor security, so the Germans knew their every move, but they couldn't do too much to stop it. And soon the French would reach the Hindenburg Line. And by April 25th, the casualties reached to 130,000, most in the first 2 days. The British would also attack Arras, but it didn't really matter. The Canadians also helped a bit. And back to France, 2,000 French soldiers in Verdun surrendered. So the French executed 27 people and imprisoned 3,000. From now on, most French soldiers only did defense unless their officers told them for offense. While the West Front was moving, the Ottomans were doing worse and worse every day, especially with the capture of Jerusalem. And on the Macedonian front, they made a breakthrough and started liberating Serbia. And at that point, Bulgaria just gave up and signed an armistice with the Allies. Now back to where the final battles were, the Western Front. The French, British, and Germans were very scared of a revolution, so both sides tried to make quick gains to end the war. And the Germans were making a plan to win the war. They would attack British forces on the 21st of March and make some gains. But they soon had to stop due to lack of tanks, motorized artillery, and American freedom. So now it was the Allies' turn for an offensive, and they started the 100-day offensive. It started with the Battle of Amiens. There was 120,000 troops and over 400 tanks. With morale low for the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary knew that victory was not likely. And with most Germans retreating, along with protests in northern Germany, leading to the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. And their ally Austria-Hungary was not doing much better, as Italy was finally pushing into the mountains and several parts of the empire were declaring independence, along with the overthrowing of the Habsburg monarchy. Austria-Hungary would sign an armistice on November 3rd, and the new German government would sign an armistice on November 11th, beginning peace talks. Dun, dun, dun. Wait, you're still watching? I didn't know that was even possible. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. This video was almost exactly a year in the making. Of course, it isn't anything fancy, just some simple 4 frame per second animation and mostly Wikipedia. I kinda wish I didn't use Wikipedia because I now have this giant World War I book, but if I used that instead, this video probably would have taken 5 years to make and it would have been 1 hour. As you can see, my art style and I guess how I approach things changes a lot in this video because of how long it took to make. I even went from 1 hour a day of animating to 3. I made the script back in October 2023. I kinda wish I made it better, but I guess that's for next video. But yeah, thank you so much for waiting, or even just clicking this video. Ever since the start of my channel, my goal has been to change the world without doing what everyone else does, somehow. I mean, a long-form video about boring history with bad animation? Doesn't sound like it's gonna do too well, but that's why I need you to, subscribe. Yeah. Thanks to my family for doing some voice acting in this video and some of the trailers. And big thanks to the fans of Such a Stinky Head for waiting.